So I'm Jake Shannon. I am the current chair of the Libertarian Party of Utah. I am also host of Mental Self-Defense Radio here locally in Utah. As the chair of the Libertarian Party, one of the names that like legendary names here in Utah and Utah libertarianism, is a guy by the name of Willy Marshall. And for me personally, his story is absolutely fascinating on many, many levels because, you know, as libertarians, as a third party, we're usually ridiculed. We are totally realistically the underdog, like consistently. And when I look at Willy Marshall, he's taken the whole underdog thing to a whole new level. But what's great is that he's actually won. So without further ado, I want to introduce Willy Marshall. Now, Willy, again, before we get into it, Willy is a libertarian. He's openly gay, and he was elected mayor of a Utah town, which, boy, I still can't quite. I still think this is a whole. You know, I expect Ashton Kutcher to jump out and like this is a punked episode or something, but your story is absolutely fascinating to me. So tell us a little bit about your story, your challenges, and I mean, let's start with this. How shocked were you that you got elected? I mean,
oh, I wasn't surprised at all. When it finally happened, I wasn't surprised at all. I knew I was going to win, but let's go back to beginning first.
Sure.
If we can. I became a libertarian right after my Mormon mission. I'd read Atlas Shrugged.
Okay.
And when I got home from my mission, well, I kind of considered myself to be an objective. After I read Atlas Shrugged, I considered myself to be an objectivist.
Yeah.
And I hadn't really joined. I hadn't even heard of the libertarians yet, really. 1981. I got off my mission in 1980, or late 79. But I didn't hear about Ed Clark at all in 1980. Never heard of him. But I'd read,
like the majority of everybody else.
But I had read. So I ended up voting like American Party, I believe, in 1980. You know, because I was for the Constitution and stuff, whatever. But so my very first time I ran for office, I ran for school board, Davis County School Board, in 1980, and my platform was basically, you know, lower taxes, more freedom, more choice, parental choice in education, voc ed type stuff,
so
options for people to get out of the public school. Public schools are not for everybody.
Yeah. One
size doesn't fit all. And so that was my thing, and I'd read some Paul Goodman and stuff, who's had some really interesting things to say about how bad government schools are. So anyway, that's what kind of started me on that. But then I was in an Albertsons or a Safeway, and it was a Safeway. And there was on the magazine rack there by the checkout stand, there was this book with this red, white, and blue cover, kind of stars and stripes thing, and it said "Restoring the American Dream" by Robert Ringer. And being a patriotic kind of guy, I thought, oh, that's interesting. So I picked it up and opened it up, and it said something like, in the very beginning, it said, "This book kind of is, you know, I want to salute Ayn Rand and Robert Heinlein," or something. Anyway, Ayn Rand was mentioned there, and I thought, oh, well, hey.
Yeah, this is for you.
And so I bought this book, and I read it. And then I went and I applied. I had one job that I didn't care for much, and so I went and applied for another job at an alarm company in Salt Lake, a secure, you know, private home alarm type thing. And I go in there, and I'm carrying this "Restoring the American Dream," which I was almost done reading, and a copy of Mother Earth News. And I go in there for my job, and sitting behind the desk, working at the alarm company, was Bob Waldrop. And he says, "Oh," he says, "are you a libertarian?" And I says, "Well, I've been reading this book, and I am now." And he says, "Oh, well, would you like to join the party?" And I said, "Sure." So I did.
Interesting.
And so
this is
Bob Waldrop was the first
80s.
libertarian. 1980. It was the spring of 1980, and so Bob Waldrop was the first libertarian I met in the flesh.
Wow.
And so he signed me up, and I came to the state convention, and I I became a libertarian. Actually, this was in 81, excuse me, 81. Because, like I said, the 80 election was already over, so it was spring of 81. And so I went to the 1981 National Libertarian Convention in Denver.
I see.
I hitchhiked to it.
Wow.
And stuff, and that was a mind blower because there were 1,000 people. There was a big convention, and it was really wild. It was just fun as could be.
So we were talking a little bit. We were talking a little before we were started filming that actually you're not the first libertarian mayor here in Utah either.
Well, no, because in I became very active in the party. I started running for office. I ran in '82 for Congress against Jim Hansen, and I even ran some TV ads on late night on David Letterman, because at the time they were like $5 a spot. So I spent a couple $100 of my own money and ran some TV ads on.
Well, I remember Letterman was actually supporting Ron Paul when he ran as a libertarian as well. And this was '88, but
But anyway. So I became party secretary, and I was party secretary for 10 years or so here in Utah. And during that time, I also did candidate recruitment. And one of the people, I went out on little road trips around Utah, looking up people that I'd heard about, or that were on our mailing list, or things that I'd try to encourage them to run for office and so on. And so I'd heard about Alex Joseph, the notorious polygamist from southern Utah and from Bigwater. And I had actually met his friend Royston Potter in Salt Lake, who was a Murray cop who got fired for being a polygamist. I don't know if you remember that back in the early mid-'80s. And I'd seen Roy Potter on TV, and I thought he needs to be a libertarian. So I went and saw Roy, just knocked on his door and gave him Restoring the American Dream. I said, "Here, read this, and if you like it, then I'd like you to join the party and run for office." So he did. He read it, he joined the party, he ran for sheriff of Salt Lake County. And he said, "You need to go see my friend Alex, he'd love this." And so I went down to Bigwater and did the same down there. And Alex was not home at the time, and he just said, well, I met a couple of his wives. He had 9 wives at the time, and I met a couple of them. They said, "Well, we'll give him your book and we'll tell him what you said, but we're Republicans and we're not going to change." So I said, "Okay." So he called me 2 weeks later. He said, "Hi, this is Alex Joseph." And he said, "I've read your book and I just love it. I could have written it. It's just like what I could have written myself." And he says, "I'm joining the party." And he was already the sitting mayor of Bigwater. And so he joined the LP, and all the city council members who were all allies of his, they all joined the LP too, as well as the judge. And so we had the first totally libertarian town in the world.
Wow. How cool is that?
So they immediately, they abolished taxes. They abolished the local property tax, which is the only tax they were levying. They abolished the taxes. They contracted out all of the services of the town. They put everything up for bid. And so it really was a model.
They did this. It's a libertarian town.
Yeah.
And it didn't self-implode. There weren't wild people running in the streets, having orgies or anything like that.
No more than before, anyway. But no, no. But no, it didn't. There was nothing wrong with it at all. In fact, the town thrived at that point. They started getting more water connections, more people moving in.
Wow.
I mean, it was a gradual thing. I don't know how much you could credit it to that, but it did definitely prosper. And what brought it down, and I'm sorry to say, was what I would call a California asshole libertarian moved to town because he'd heard about it, and he moved there and started causing trouble.
Interesting.
And he sued the town, busted their budget. He lost the case, but it busted the budget because, lawsuits are expensive and stuff. And he sued the town. And they're not being libertarian enough.
Well, now you mentioned...
And it was awful. But anyway, so the next year they had to go and raise taxes.
So you mentioned that you're I hope I can... It doesn't bother you, but you said you're a fan of, say, Alex Jones, right? The radio host.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. I think Alex Jones is the best talk show host.
I think what Alex might suggest is that, in fact, that might have been an agent provocateur or somebody who was sent in to destroy the libertarians by saying, "I'm a libertarian."
Exactly. And I don't know what his trip is. I mean, there are a lot of what I would call California asshole libertarians, and that's where he was from. And that, it's like more libertarian than thou.
Yeah.
You know, you're not pure enough. You
It's
can't
the
be a
same in
libertarian
anything.
because you don't agree with me on abortion.
I'm sure you've had that with gays.
Yeah.
I know that punk rock, like you have to be more punk rock and have the bigger mohawk and all this kind of stuff. And yeah, I'm understanding.
So, I don't know if he was an agent provocateur, but if he wasn't, he sure did the job of one, because he really destroyed the Libertarian Party in that town. He gave it such a bad name.
And it sounded like it was great. If you had the city council, you had a judge, you had the mayor.
Total. It was wonderful. And
so now wait a minute. So he comes to town. Now was this during the polygamous mayors?
Well, yeah, he came right after Bigwater became the Libertarian town, and the news got out. He came there and bought property and built a small apartment building and came down there and moved in, basically. So then, and I met him right then, and I thought, oh, cool, you know, this is neat. This is great. I hope more libertarians move here. Well, I wish he hadn't moved there at all.
With hindsight.
Yeah.
So then what inspired you?
Oh. Well,
to get involved.
When I met Alex and stuff, I mean, we hit it off, and he and his family just started treating me like part of the family. In fact, they told me, you're part of the family, you know. And he had 9 wives and 22 children. And they all just took me in. And I just thought, this is so neat. I felt like I'd discovered Galt's Gulch.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
I was enchanted by Bigwater when I first went there. I thought, wow, this is really neat. And I kind of... Well, it wasn't, I was perhaps a little too starry-eyed about it all, because the people in Bigwater are not all that libertarian. I mean, they have kind of a basic, freedom,
live and let live
sort of mentality, but when it gets right down to it, they're not people like in Galt's Gulch.
So they were getting the first few pages of the libertarian concept, but they hadn't quite got the whole... The whole picture.
And but anyway, Bigwater had always been kind of an outlaw town. A lot of well, polygamists, obviously, tax rebels, pot smokers. You know, just your usual assortment. I was like the first gay, but
well, this is interesting too, because
I met some after I moved out. But anyway,
thing that's always, and we talked about this a little bit, was that I've always thought that. It's strange. Now, of course, we know that the big 2 parties are the Republicans, Democrats. I mean, I look at it like phony pro wrestling. It's Stone Cold versus The Rock. It's all fake, set up, whatever. But for whatever reason, gays have always found themselves in the Democratic Party, maybe as a reaction against the religious flavor that the Republican Party has taken on in the last 40 years. But it always seems to me like you see this... people here in Utah are probably well aware of that HBO Big Love show, and that it's about a polygamous family, but that the writers and producers are actually 2 gay men.
Yeah.
Because the issues are the same, which I think is ironic that a lot of Mormons and gays, there seems to be a loggerheads, all the different Prop 8 and all that kind of stuff in California. But when in fact they should actually, they're fighting for kind of the same thing, and that's the right to contract.
Right.
With regards to a marriage.
Oh yeah. To me, marriage is not, it's not a, it all boils down to, do you believe in, well, I'll take this kind of argument. Okay. It's a constitutional argument. Do adults have a right to enter into contracts? And the Constitution basically says that. So if you believe that, then why do adults not have the right to enter into contracts if they both happen to be men? Marriage is a contract. It's a lot of things too. It's a very complicated contract, and it's got religious things, or it can have, it can have the religious...
It's the same problem that we found earlier in this country when blacks and whites couldn't marry.
Exactly.
And in fact, marriage should be completely taken out of statutory law and put into contract law, so the government's not even involved except on the back end if there's a dispute with the contract.
Well, and blacks and whites could marry at the beginning of this country. Blacks and whites could marry. The miscegenation laws came about later. They came about in the 1800s.
Interesting.
Not in the beginning. Whites also married Indians. Indian women married white
Native
men.
Americans.
And so on. And... so that wasn't prohibited. It was until later. So
it
government was not involved in marriage in the beginning.
Because really the Democrats, I mean, they have one heck of a PR team.
Yeah.
But the gays aren't served by supporting the Democrats. I mean, I frankly don't see it. I mean, don't ask, don't tell. All these things that are that are quote unquote gay issues, the Democrats are just as bad as the Republicans. It seems like.
You know, and don't ask, don't tell wasn't repealed except by finally the lawsuit brought by the log cabin Republicans of all people. Yeah, and that's what actually caused it. It wasn't because Obama or any Democratic Congress or Senate passed anything to change it. It came about because of something the Republicans did, which is odd. But anyway.
Well, I find that interesting because really, I mean, the only real party out there that that's part of the platform is really this right to contract. It is the Libertarian Party, and that it makes sense that you got elected to Big Water, as well as, and his name was Parsons. Is that right?
Well, Alex Joseph.
Joseph, I'm sorry.
Got elected. Well, and he was already elected. He was already elected, but he got reelected as a libertarian.
Now, how many times did you run or were you elected?
I served one term.
1 term. 4 years. Okay. Yeah. So what was that like? I mean, so you run.
Well, you said you were confident. It was really fun for the first 2 years.
You said you were confident. You said you knew.
Yeah.
You said, I know I'm going to get elected.
I knew I was going to. I'd already run 12 times for office. And I came pretty close my 10th election, my 10th race.
Which was?
Fairly close to being elected mayor of Bountiful, because I was living up here. And I was running against the incumbent, and the RDA was the issue, Redevelopment Agency was the issue. And it's just, you know, corrupt and wasteful and just, you know, anti-property rights and all the, you know, there's a lot to criticize there, and that's the issue I was running on. And when the primary came about, there were 3 of us running, and I came in second, a pretty close second. He got 41%, I got 37%.
Wow.
And then the third guy got 21%.
Were you still running on the Libertarian Party?
No, well, everybody knew I was a Libertarian.
Okay.
And I wasn't out yet. I was starting to figure it out, you know, to figure out my own sexuality at the time, but I wasn't out yet. I was still going to church and everything.
Yeah.
And in fact, I was in the same ward as the incumbent mayor. Wow. You know. But, so I came in a close second, but anyway, he got, he knew that if he didn't do something, he was going to lose, because the anti-incumbent vote was greater than what voted for him. And so what he did was he got, and I don't have proof of this, but I know it's what happened. He or some of his supporters got this other guy to run in the general election as a write-in. A man who'd never run for anything before.
To split the vote.
A recently released bishop.
Yeah.
And he'd never run for anything before. He's never run for anything since. And all of a sudden he comes up and he goes, "Oh yeah, write me in. I'm running for mayor, and I've got some problems with the RDA, but you know, blah blah blah." And, you know, kind of like to split the vote. And but I'm not real comfortable with what the mayor's been doing and this kind of stuff, you know. And he just kind of...
To split that anti-incumbent.
But mostly he was running on a campaign of innuendo. He was going around telling people, when he'd talk to him, he'd say, "Well, you know that Willy Marshall, I just don't know about him. He's 30... Let's see, how old would I have been? 30. He's 35 and he's not married, and I don't know, it just doesn't look very... He's not a family man. It doesn't look very good." And so it was this campaign of innuendo. And like I said, I wasn't out yet. I didn't... You know, I hadn't done a thing. And I was still going to church and everything, and for him to do that, I thought was really nasty. But it succeeded, and so the mayor won. He won the election because of the write-in vote. He got 48%.
Mm. Wow.
And then I got 31%, and,
which is still substantial.
And then the write-in guy got 21%. And so he was able to split off enough votes with this phony write-in campaign to cause the mayor to get reelected. And so that's what happened. And then anyway, this former bishop, he just goes on his way and he did his job, and he's never been involved in politics since. And so to me, it was obviously a put-up job. And anyway, in 2000, I sold my business. I had a little TV station here in Salt Lake, and I sold that, and I decided, you know what, I've got the time and the money. I'm going to move to Bigwater. I've always said, someday I'd like to live in Bigwater. Well, I'm going to go give it a try for a year, you know, just see how I like it. So I bought a house down there, and I moved down there, and I got involved. And just after I moved there, this one man got mad and quit the Planning and Zoning Committee, and so I applied for it and I got appointed to it. And that was within a couple of months of moving there. And so I showed up and I started going to their meetings, and I would always wear a tie, you know, shirt and tie to the meeting. And this is unheard of, you know, especially in little towns, not just in Bigwater, but anywhere. People going to planning and zoning meetings don't usually wear a tie, you know. But I always thought, you know, if you're going to do it, you should look the part. Yeah. You should look like you're serious and professional. Whatever. Sure. And so I would do that. And then a few months after that, the mayor and one city council member got mad and quit. They resigned their positions. And so I got appointed to be on city council. And then this other gal who moved to Bigwater fairly recently, she got appointed to be mayor. And I thought she was all right in the beginning. At the time, there was a disincorporation petition going on. The mayor who quit, he was one of the leaders of the petition to disincorporate the town. You know, it's like, well, if I can't have it, nobody should, and kind of a thing. And the taxes were high and stuff. That was the main complaint of the people is, hey, our taxes are really high and we're getting nothing for it and all this. And so I told the new mayor, I said, you know, I looked at the books. I said, we could cut this disincorporation thing off at the knees. All you got to do is promise to lower taxes. Just lower taxes. That's what everybody's complaining about. They're not getting anything for their money. And I said, we've got so much money in the budget, or we've got so much money in savings, we can do this. It won't matter. And so she did. She claimed, you know, she says, I promise that we will lower the taxes at our next budget session, which was coming up in May, and the election was in January or February. And so the disincorporation did fail. It failed 2-1. Great. Comes May, I'm on the council, she's the mayor, and she comes to me and says, well, Willie, we're just not going to be able to cut taxes after all. There's things I want to do. And among them was she wanted a salary for being mayor. And so she voted herself a salary of $13,000 a year, which is ridiculous for a town that size, 400 people. Most towns of 400 do not have paid officials at all, you know. And so she got that, and I just said, well, it's your funeral. That's what I thought. And so when the election came up later that, was that May? Yeah, came up later that year. I ran against her. And I ran on the platform of, I will cut taxes and I will repeal the mayor's salary. Those were my two promises. Wow. And that's all I ran on. But I went to every door in town, well, except hers and her clerk. But I went and knocked on every door. I had a little one-page flyer just saying what, you know, I was going to do. And everybody in town knew I was gay. Yeah. And stuff. That wasn't the thing. But anyway, she didn't campaign really. She thought she had it in the bag, and she even told her clerk. She says, who's going to vote for that gay guy? Well, she got beat. There you are. She got beat pretty badly. And it was funny because the day after the election, she left town. She put a for sale sign out in her front yard, and she left town for months, and she didn't come back. And wow. She was so humiliated. She could not believe it. And so the next meeting was in November. Well, see, the election was like November 3rd or whatever. So later in November, we had still November and December city council meetings, and she wasn't there. And so I was the mayor-elect, and I was already on the council, so I led those two meetings. And that first meeting was when we did our marijuana ordinance, and we decriminalized marijuana. The very first meeting, and that was hilarious. And there was one council member who was against that at first. He said, well, aren't we sending a message to kids that it's okay to smoke pot? And I said, no, we're sending a message to kids that the punishment should fit the crime, and this one does. Because the punishment under our ordinance was for possession of up to 1 ounce of marijuana was a fine of $10, which is way less than any parking ticket. And
but you guys, because of that, you ran into trouble actually.
Yes,
because
yes, we did.
This is kind of a challenge with, like, say, even the 10th Amendment.
Well, not really, because we were it was still illegal under our town law. It was just that the penalty was pretty trivial.
But the state, and I'm sure the state of Utah and the feds, weren't too happy about it.
No, the county sheriff took great exception to our ordinance, as did the highway patrol. The day after we passed it, this highway patrolman came into our town office. I wasn't there in the office at the time, but he came in and he pounded his fist on the counter and he says, "Who's the dope smoking son of a bitch that passed this?" You know, and he was, you know, it was pretty scary for a while. But anyway, they started putting a lot of pressure on the town. The highway patrol came and invaded our town a few weeks later. They sent 6 patrol cars over in our little town, which didn't even have paved roads. These are dirt roads we're talking about. And they were driving all over town, pulling over everybody they could and ticketing them for anything they could find. Cracked tail light, cracked windshield, not wearing a seatbelt, not having your kid in a child seat, not signaling, you name it. They were ticketing everybody. And one of the officers told this lady who was a school teacher at our school, he ticketed her for not having a kid in a child seat. And he says, "Well, this is happening because Bigwater has a drug problem." Well, all the people they pulled over that day, they didn't find any drugs. It was just harassment. And so, anyway, some of the council members came to me and they said, we need to repeal this ordinance. This is just awful. You know, we're being overrun by the police. This is harassment and everything. And they wanted to have an emergency meeting. I said, no. I said, we're not going to have it. Well, we can put it on the agenda for the next meeting and do it then, but I am not going to have an emergency meeting for this. And so the next meeting we did repeal the ordinance. Oh, and I wanted to say that one guy that said we're sending the message to kids, he ended up voting for it too. It passed unanimously. And when I left that meeting, I said I went home and wrote in my journal, I says, damn, I could talk these people into anything. So, anyway.
But that's the thing with liberty arguments,
well, yeah, liberty arguments work.
They're persuasive because people, I think there is something very ingrained in America about live and let live. Let people just, if they're not hurting.
But you know what? If I'd have been as a citizen going to the council and saying, hey, I think here's this model ordinance, I think you ought to pass it, they wouldn't have given me the time of day. But I found that out when I became a member of Planning and Zoning. When you are on a board, all of a sudden, your opinion matters. People listen to what you say.
Interesting.
And that was surprising to me. Is like all of a sudden, they take your argument seriously. And so when your arguments are in favor of liberty, people listen to you and they go, oh yeah, that sounds good.
Because you know,
so I thought that was a fascinating.
The challenge that I'm finding as the chair of the Libertarian Party of Utah is that libertarians are individualistic. They don't like being a part of a group, and it's like herding cats. To get any kind of to get liberty-minded people to work together towards things. And so one of the things that I really like to tell people is that run as a libertarian. At least, even so, if you end up like Willy and you get elected, which I want you to talk about, what the heck do you do if you actually get elected? But at least, even if you don't, you are running and you can use it as like a didactic type of exercise. You can teach people about the arguments of liberty. And
well, I think, for example, Ron Paul and Gary Johnson have done a good job of that in running for president, because even though, of course, they can't win and all that, their ideas are getting out there, and I think it's caused the shift kind of in among the other candidates. They're trying to come up with ways of, well, we could cut government here, or we could do this or that, which will help the economy and stuff, which they wouldn't be saying if Ron Paul hadn't paved the way. I mean, Rick Perry never would have said anything about Social Security had not Ron Paul, said this is a big Ponzi.
But by them running, even though they may not win, they're changing the terms of the debate.
The debate. That's true. That's true. They are.
And the great thing is now, sure, like a Ron Paul or a Gary Johnson, they've had success running, like Ron Paul being elected to Congress 12 times and whatnot. That is great.
Right.
But sometimes, like especially in this state, it's hard to run and get up into a rank, say, with the predominant party here, the Republican Party, because of all the little backbiting, and they have their little system to make sure that only the right guy gets in. Whereas these third parties here, like the Libertarian Party, or to be fair, the Constitution Party, it's not a big bureaucracy. You actually can just get in and run, because, I mean, we are small. We are the underdogs. We want people to run. So you actually have a chance to really affect a change.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. You could certainly get out there and at least debate the issues. So that's a real plus as far as running as a Libertarian or the party. It gives you a forum where you wouldn't even, the Republican gatekeepers wouldn't let you get that far. Well, it depends. You maybe could. It's case by case situation on that.
But back to your story. So you run, you beat her, she puts up her house for sale. So you run, and now all of a sudden, what do you do?
Oh well, after I repealed my salary, and of course we had to wait till May when the budget session is to actually cut taxes, because that's another thing I promised. I promised I would cut taxes by 1/3, which would make us, well, anyway, it was a good amount. The town treasurer at the time, she says, if you do that, the town will go bankrupt. Well, I didn't cut it by 1/3. I cut it by 50%, and the town didn't go bankrupt. And she left. So I got another treasurer that was more in tune with what I wanted to do. But so anyway, after I kept those promises, I thought, well, what else can I do now? Here I am 6 months into my term, and I've fulfilled my campaign promises. So now what should I do? And so I looked around, and I thought, well, what's the one thing I could do for this town that would make it a better place? And so the dirt roads was the thing, because when you drove through Bigwater, I mean, it's dusty. It was just nasty. It was bumpy and washboard and all this, and it was like going into a campground. It really was. It didn't feel like a town. And I thought, paving the streets would be the best thing. So I did. I looked into it. Started talking to other mayors and finding out how other small towns have paved their streets and different ways of doing it and paying for it and stuff.
So how was it inevitably funded?
Well, I ended up getting half a grant. It was done by half grant and half loan. Half of a grant from the CIB, Community Impact Board. Those monies, now all grants are not created equal. All government handouts or grants are not necessarily bad or unlibertarian. The money from the CIB is mineral leasing money from state lands, so it's not really tax money. It's the state has these lands and these mineral rights, and they lease it out, and so that money is then put into this big pot, which the CIB gives out.
So nobody's labor is being taxed?
No, not really. Yeah. I mean, you could argue against government ownership of these lands and mineral rights and whatever, but it is what it is, and it's not like somebody's being forced to, pay the state of Utah for the money for this CIB thing. I mean, they.
So you did half for the grant and half for like a bond issue or something?
Half was a loan and half was a grant. Well, the bond, we did the loan through the CIB also, and I'm good at paperwork, so I filled out all the paperwork and stuff. So we got half the money was a grant from them, and then the other half was a loan from them. And but the loan, the way the gasoline tax, which is not an unlibertarian tax, it's a user fee.
It's a user fee, right?
It's your tax so many cents per gallon.
Which makes sense with regards to your using the road.
Goes to the state. Yeah. The state then divvies it up and gives it out to the counties and cities according to how many miles of roads you have, according to 3 classifications. They give you X dollars per mile of dirt road. They give you $2X per mile of gravel road, and they give you $5X per mile of paved road. And so paving our roads, our gas tax revenue increased so much, it more than paid back the loan. And so we paved it, we got paved streets, and we made money on the deal. It's like voodoo is. It's like, wow, neat. And so
So then you had some interesting successes because you
that really changed the town.
You pushed for liberty to the point where the man actually had to come in and like harass.
Right.
Which really, in my mind, at least you did that because it made people aware of how unfree.
And all the council members, when we voted to undo that ordinance, every one of the council members, including that one who'd initially opposed it, he said, "We live in a police state. We really resent having to do this."
Wow.
They said, "This is wrong for the state and to come in and tell us that we have to do this." And they were all pretty mad about it. So that was good. But anyway, after we repealed the ordinance, I just said, well, we'll just handle this administratively, because as mayors in Utah have a huge amount of power. You wouldn't think so. They do. And mayors set the budget. They hire all the people,
including the local police.
Including the police. They make all the appointments to planning and zoning, vacancies on council, whatever. The town officers are appointed by the mayor, the treasurer, the clerk, etc. Also the judge, the town justice of the peace. And so I appointed Gary King, who's a longtime Libertarian, party member and former candidate. He's living down there too. And I appointed him to be the town justice of the peace.
Nice.
And Gary is brilliant. He is absolutely brilliant. He's just a mind like a steel trap. I mean, he really has a great understanding of law, and he is a very principled libertarian, and he was a fantastic justice of the peace.
And then Rob Latham came down to
Well, now that was later. Rob was later. Initially I appointed a friend of mine who was an attorney from Salt Lake, and who was not a libertarian, but he's what I would call a conservatarian.
Okay, sure.
And I'd given him Reason. He read Reason magazine and stuff, and he was on board with me on the marijuana issue.
Sure.
He agreed that if we were to get any cases, he would just move to dismiss them, and the judge would dismiss them.
Yeah.
And that would be it. Decline to prosecute kind of a thing. I also, when I would interview cops, I would tell, because I started the police department down there. And when I did my interviews, I even ran an ad in LP News saying, "Unique opportunity for law enforcement, come be a cop in a libertarian town, But I didn't get any answers on that, unfortunately.
But when you were interviewing, you did.
But when I did interviews, I told people, I told the cops, I said, you need to understand, the Big Water's not like other towns. I mean, we have polygamists, we have pot smokers, I'm gay, and if you have a problem with any of that, you probably shouldn't work here." And I said, what I'm looking for is I want Andy Griffith and chips. And what I don't want is Miami Vice and cops. And I said, "Do you understand what I'm talking about? I want somebody to keep the peace. I don't want you throwing people in jail for stuff they're doing that doesn't hurt other people. I just want you to keep the peace. If a real crime happens, I expect you to, of course, enforce it. If somebody steals something or beats somebody up, yeah. But this other stuff, no. We believe in freedom here." And on our cop cars, I got used cop car from the state surplus. An old highway patrol car, is white, and so I had lightning bolts going down the side of it, and at the back fender it had freedom, responsibility, community, is what it said. Awesome. None of this to serve and protect crap, which people can see through. It's not, no, it's to harass and intimidate, is what mostly police do. But ours is, no. Freedom, responsibility, community.
That is awesome.
And so that's what it was on our.
So see, to me, in my mind, Big Water does sound like Galt's Gulch, but not Galt's Gulch on paper. Because, yeah, you can make anything on paper sound one way. A real Galt's Gulch would be polygamists, normal people, whatever that means.
Yeah.
Pot smokers, anybody could be openly gay. Right. It would be a pro-freedom
absolutely.
city.
Absolutely. And people loved it. For the first 2 years, they really did love it. And as mayor, also, I granted pardons. Mayors can grant pardons. Few people know this. And so I went through all the judge and I went through all the cases that were still unsettled in the court, in the justice court, and I granted a bunch of pardons, probably more pardons than any mayor
Somebody
has
convicted of a
in Utah history,
a victim of crime type of thing.
Yeah, or traffic stuff or whatever. I pardoned a guy for loose dog, and he hugged me when I went to his door and gave him this thing saying, you know, this was a thing in the court for loose dog, and I think it was $40 or $60 or something like that, and he hadn't paid it, so I said, I'm granting you a pardon, and he hugged me. oh, you know. And this other gal had a DUI, and I pardoned her because she didn't get in a wreck or anything, and she'd had one too many or whatever, and she happened to get caught. She was a young unwed mother kind of thing, and a nice gal, really. And so I pardoned her, and she was quite grateful about that too, you know. She didn't hug me, but she was, you know, it definitely made her day.
Yeah, and to have that off the record.
To have that off the record, because she was dirt poor, and this fine was like $1,000, you know, that she was supposed to be paying to the court on, you know, and I just said, yeah, don't worry about it, just don't get in trouble again, you know. And then I had, the funnest one I had though was we had an old marijuana case, which was a guy who'd gotten caught with an ounce of marijuana. The fine was $1,600, and he'd pled guilty. The previous judge had fined him $1,600, and he never paid it. So I sent him a pardon. and then when I sent out the pardons, I put, you know, this is a pardon. You don't need to do anything else. You know, no further action is necessary on your part. The case is dismissed, and blah blah. Wow. You don't owe us anything. And I'd say, and then I put in a plug for libertarianism. You know, I'd say, you know, as a libertarian, I believe that people have a right to live their own lives and blah blah blah. You know, whatever. Yeah. And I put in kind of a pitch there, and I also would include in every pardon I issued, I also gave a little green card, which was the ACLU bust card. You know, what to do if you were stopped by the police.
Yeah.
and all this.
Wow.
That's so I throw that in.
Blown people's minds.
And the ACLU didn't even know I was doing that. But anyway, I thought that was a fun touch to put in our pardons that we issued. So.
Wow. And then, so you actually then, because of your successes, because of your integrity to say, yeah, I am libertarian, I am going to pull, you know, reduce taxes, and you did it. Mm-hmm. Which shouldn't be an anomaly, but unfortunately it is these days.
Yeah.
But then even when you were done with that, I mean, you went touring around giving lectures to libertarians.
Right. I was invited to several state LP conventions. I went to Kentucky, Florida, Texas, New Mexico, and I also spoke at the LP National Convention a few times. On the title of my presentation was How Almost Any Libertarian Who is Reasonably Presentable Can Get Elected to Public Office, and what to do, or can get into public office, and what to do once you get there. So
that's a good.
It's a good long title, but
but that's a good speech.
It is. It was fun. So yeah, I'd tell people what to do, and like I say, mayors have a lot of power, and it's like the power to pardon is amazing. And you can pardon for anything that comes within your justice court jurisdiction. In other words, felonies wouldn't. They would go to the district court and you can't do anything about that, you know.
But misdemeanors.
But all the misdemeanors, even like, you know, possession of an ounce of marijuana, that would be a justice court. DUIs are justice court, you know. All your small crimes would be too. You know, and also we, you know, assign community service, you know, try to figure out things that people could do that actually be sort of a service to community rather than just, you know.
So why do you think traditionally, like, you know, I was actually, because I lived in San Francisco for 6 years before, and then I moved to LA and I was there for like 5 years, and both have very strong gay communities.
Oh, sure.
I was shocked to find out that there's such a big gay community in Salt Lake City.
Oh yeah, it's huge.
Per capita, you know, when you look at the total percentage of the population, I mean, is it as simple as that it's just a reaction that gays tend to gravitate towards the Democratic Party because the Republicans are so religious?
Because I think most gays, especially in Utah, most of the gays in Utah used to be, quote, conservative or Republican or whatever, but when they come out, they feel very insulted.
For just being who they are.
Just for being gay. They feel very insulted as being gay by a lot of Republican politicians and stuff. And the Republican Party itself especially, just really is goes out of its way to try and offend and insult gays. And so they, well, you know what, screw you. And so they then turn into these rabid liberal Democrats.
But yourself,
and but that's not what they really believe.
Yourself,
I think. It's a reaction.
You're a Utahn. I mean, you've been in Utah forever.
Right.
You are political.
Yeah.
And you are gay, so you are well aware of all of these various circles.
Well, yeah, but I wouldn't let that one issue drive me into being a Democrat.
Right, and this is
I
my
believe
point.
in freedom as a whole, and some people have even said, some gay libertarians have even said, oh, well, Ron Paul's not any good because he votes against gays and blah, blah, blah on certain issues and whatever. And I said, you know what? I haven't looked into those particular issues about Ron Paul's votes on gay issues or whatever. I know... like, for example, during that one debate 4 years ago, Ron Paul, you know, they asked, well, are there any of you on this 9 candidates running for president, any of you who would do away with don't ask, don't tell? And he wouldn't raise his hand.
Right.
And, you know, I think he should have raised his hand. I think he would have gotten more support had he done so. I think it would have been very interesting for him to say, you know what, I agree with Barry Goldwater. I don't care if a soldier is straight as long as he can shoot straight.
Right.
It would have been a great line. He didn't think of it. I'm sure if he had thought of it, maybe he would have gone that way. But I don't, you know, I've had dinner with Ron Paul. I drove him around Salt Lake when he was running for president, you know, and stuff. And I don't think he's anti-gay at all. But you know,
speaking to Utah Democrats, right. I mean, if you're gay, it doesn't make you socialist.
No, no.
What the heck? Why do they do that?
Well,
and I understand. I mean, I understand because then they don't want to be, you know, the bastard, the redheaded stepchild of the Republican Party and the log cabin Republicans.
But they're the ignored stepchild of the Democrats. The Democrat politicians in Utah don't ever stand up for gays either. They just don't. They take their votes for granted, and on the national level, it's even worse. You know, with Don't Ask, Don't Tell, that was a Clinton thing.
Yep.
And they can always count on the gays for money and votes, but they don't when it comes time to actually do something. Or they know that those votes are in the bag, and after all, we can ignore them because what are they going to do? Vote Republican?
Right, and it reminds me of the Latinos.
Yeah.
That Latinos actually typically have, I don't know what maybe conservative values or whatever, but really the Democrats, the Libertarian Party has a much more open policy with regards to immigration than either one of the two parties.
Sure.
But somehow, again, the Democrats vacuum them up almost as just a reaction against the Republicans. So it's unfortunate. I wish that more people, I mean, that's one of the reasons why I wanted to talk with you, because you've lived it. Mm-hmm. And you've got perspective.
Yeah.
And you're proof that you don't have to be a cliche.
No.
You can be yourself, 100%.
Mm-hmm.
To be an openly gay libertarian mayor is like awesome. That is like the ultimate expression of individualism.
Yeah, some people have asked me, about, oh, well, how did being gay affect your campaign and stuff? I said, well, you know what? Everybody in town knew I was gay. That wasn't really an issue. I don't think I lost more than a handful of votes because of it. There were probably a few people in town that were maybe good Mormons or whatever, but they didn't vote for me because of that. Well, I don't want to vote for him, he's gay. But I don't know of any personally. I've talked to a few good Mormons I know in Big Water, and they said they did vote for me, you know, and they became some of my biggest supporters. But the only gay vote I got was mine. There were 2 other gay guys in town, and they didn't vote for me.
They didn't vote for you,
which I think is hilarious.
So this is actually
I'm glad they didn't.
I've got my own answer in my head, but I want your perspective. Okay, what is more of a stigma? To run for office openly gay, or to run for office as a libertarian in this state? Which is worse?
Boy, I'd say running as a libertarian.
I think so too.
But everybody knew I was a libertarian. I mean, they really did.
Yes.
They knew where I was. They knew where I was coming from. It was no surprise. So.
Well, it's fascinating stuff. So what are you doing these days? Are you just kind of?
I'm out of politics right now. I'm gonna get back into it. I can't help myself, I'm afraid. It's my mission. It's my calling in life, I think, is to be involved in politics. But like I said, I've been having a vacation lately, and I've been quite enjoying it.
A nice sabbatical, maybe?
Yes, yes.
Okay, wonderful.
So, yeah, I'll get back into it. I do believe that, like I say, most any libertarian or freedom-loving person who really wants to get into office can, and I can tell them exactly how.
Awesome.
I've got a little speech, a presentation, if you will, about how to get into office. And yeah, I think you need to start by getting into an appointed office. There are thousands and thousands of appointed boards in this state. You know, little planning and zoning, board of adjustments, water board, power board, etc. And all these boards are appointed, and often you can get on them just by asking. They don't even have to really know who you are.
And then you start
as mayor, I found that it was really hard to find people to fill even the boards in Bigwater. I could not find good people to be on the boards, and sometimes the only person that would even apply was somebody that I didn't like politically. But, you know.
It's just because people don't even know about it.
You know, yeah. Well, they don't know about it, or they don't seek it out. They don't seek it out. They don't think. And once you get on these boards, you know, you need to guard yourself, especially if you're not well grounded in freedom. You need to watch to not let yourself get sucked into going along with the majority. And this is how we've always done it. And you know, you gotta. It's very insidious. Even as mayor, I found that to be the case. It's like. We all know that government workers are overpaid and underworked. Everybody kind of has this gut feeling. I've worked for Salt Lake City and I've worked for the state of Utah, and in both cases, we really were overpaid and underworked. I took 3 hours for lunch one day when I was working for the state. Nobody even noticed, you know. And I had more money when I was working for those two outfits than I knew what to do with. And they have lavish benefits, you know, 5 weeks off a year for working for the city. Retirement and everything else.
So it's seductive.
It is. It's very seductive. And as mayor, I found that you have to work with your clerks and people all the time, and you want them to be happy, and so you don't want to deny them a yearly raise or cost of living increase or any of that kind of stuff. And it's scary, really. It's hard to say no to your employees, to your government workers. You know, so maybe you don't want to have them pissed off. And so the state workers are overpaid ridiculously, federal workers even more so. And yet, you know, Ron Paul, I guess, he's come out and he said he wanted to cut all federal salaries by, what, 5%? Well, I think that's way too low. I think it ought to be more like 20%. Sure. And for those over 100,000, it ought to be more like 40%. And there's lots of them that are making more than 100,000 a year. And they should be told, no. We're going to roll your salaries back to what they were in shall we say, well, even if they rolled them back to what they were in 2000. But see, this is the end of the Clinton years. Who could say government wasn't too big at that point? Roll everything back to what it was in 2000, you'd balance the budget immediately.
Yeah. This is what one of my, you know, F.A. Hayek, who's a very famous libertarian thinker, you know, one of his strategies that was brilliant was that for libertarianism or classical liberalism or whatever you want to call it to take off, you had to basically have some people in, like, he presented it as academia that had to be pushing these pro-liberty ideas. Well, I would like to see that expanded, that it shouldn't just be we need libertarians in academia, we need them actually in government.
Oh, yeah.
We need, because the thing is you felt the pressure as a libertarian mayor to keep giving these raises and whatnot. But see, meanwhile, you actually cut your own salary
to zero.
What about having libertarians that are just normal people, workers, who are saying, I'm willing to cut my salary?
Right, right.
It needs to go everywhere. We need libertarians not just running for office. We need them running, you know, that are in the workplace. Understanding that how the system works and how it's insidious, as you say.
Yeah, but when I worked for the city, I mean, the other people I were in my office, I would hear them talking about it. Oh, we're so underpaid. And like I say, at the time I was feeling like, God, you know, I never had so much money in my life, you know. And I don't feel like we're underpaid at all. And yet they were always whining about, oh yeah, we need more raise, we need this and that, and we want more money and stuff. And it's just, these people are nuts. you know, they don't have an idea what it is to work in the real world. And
have to hustle and sell and be an entrepreneur.
No, and there's plenty of waste. Even on the lowest level, even in big water, there was waste. It was no problem to balance the budget. In fact, I found that the easiest way to balance the budget is just don't take on any new programs. You can still keep doing all the wasteful things you're doing, just don't start any new ones, because revenue always goes like this with your increasing tax base and whatever. And, you know, if you just keep your spending steady, it's easy to balance the budget. You know?
But they get seduced. People get pulled into it.
They do. So it's anyway. But yeah, I think what you were saying about people need to get involved. They need to get into office. I think that's very true, because you can't trust liberty to Republicans and Democrats. They just won't do it. You can vote for Republicans and Democrats. You can vote for the lesser of two evils. You know what? They are not going to give you liberty. They're not going to vote that way. Unfortunately,
my only grievance with Ron Paul, yeah. I understand running for expediency's sake as a Republican, but my problem is he's actually giving the rub to the rest of the Republicans. He's the only one with integrity. If you look at his vote, he's the only one, and people are saying, oh, well, Ron Paul's a Republican, it must just be a Republican. That is not true at all.
No, but I can definitely see value to running as a Republican in order to get in office. But you've got to not forget where you came from and what you really believe in. And that's the hard thing, because the establishment Republicans, even here in Utah, are really going to be against you. The state Republican leaders they're very establishment. You know.
I want to thank you so much, Willie, for taking the time to share. I mean, really, I know that we hit the tip of the iceberg with your story and stuff, but I wanted to take this opportunity to really turn people on to who you are, your story. I think it's an important story for all kinds of different people, for people that are Utahns, people that are libertarians, people that might be gay in this state, people that are politically interested. I think that there's so much that's important to learn. So I am very glad that you came on. I appreciate your time. What's the best way if somebody wanted to stay in touch with you or ask you questions? Do you have an email, a preferred email? Or?
Well, I'm on Facebook. I don't like it much, but you could contact me through that.
Just Willy Marshall
check it.
There?
Yeah, I don't check it very often, and I don't update my whatever
status.
You know, I don't say what I'm doing or anything. But you could find me on Facebook. You can. My email is willystarman, WILLYSTARMAN @yahoo.com.
Okay, so Willy Starman.
That's pretty easy. I'm not in the phone book anymore because I've got a cell phone now only. So.
Yeah. Okay, so people could email you if they wanted to talk to you, or maybe to get your ideas about this larger speech that you do about how to get elected.
Sure. Oh, I think a lot of people could get into office and I wish they would. I think freedom is too important to be left up to the Republicans, Democrats. And if you really believe in freedom, you ought to get in office and do what you can and start at the lower levels. You wouldn't believe the kind of abuse there is, even in something as low as planning and zoning. The kind of denial of people's property rights that goes on. It's appalling. And we need people on these boards that, respect private property, and respect people's desires to start a business and things like that. Let's cut the red tape, If all the red tape in Washington were to disappear tomorrow, that doesn't mean there's not still a mountain of it at the state and local level here in Utah that prevents people from starting businesses, fixing up their homes, doing all kinds of good things. And
so if you had a closing message, people are watching this and they're first hearing this really amazing story, what is kind of your, what would be your closing advice?
Get involved, apply for those positions, and I highly recommend that you read the old Dale Carnegie book, How to Win Friends and Influence People. Very few libertarians, unfortunately, have read this
which
book.
Is the challenge, right? Like I was saying, herding cats. All the libertarians typically are very logical thinkers,
right?
But they have no social skills a lot of times.
Well, and unfortunately, libertarians tend to try to argue people. You know, I will keep trying to convince you until I've turned you off so much you go away. You know,
right.
We won't talk about the things we agree on. I'll keep bringing up all the things we don't agree on until you get mad at me.
Yeah.
You know, and that's not good. No, you have to go at it with a positive, friendly attitude. Don't expect people to buy the whole ball of wax. You know, find an issue and make it yours, whether it's redevelopment agency or zoning or whatever. There, a lot of libertarians and freedom-loving people could get into office if they tried and if they went about it in the right way, and get a haircut. I would shave this off in a heartbeat if I was going to run for office. You know.
Yeah.
But because you need to look and you need to dress up. You know, the basics of my talk are suit up, show up, and play the game. Suit up, obviously, is look the part. Show up means show up in the meetings, show up in the neighborhoods, go meet people. And play the game means it's this kind of Dale Carnegie stuff about be nice to people even if they're not nice to you. You know, you're not compromising your principles by being polite. You know. So anyway, that's kind of the basic message of my spiel.
Brilliant. That's brilliant. Thank you so much.
Good to be here.